So everyone, I'm really excited that you're here and reading this and looking through it. Something I've been thinking about for a while, and I think your input will be really wonderful to hear, sort of help this move forward. But also for teachers in Ecuador to be thinking about what does it look like to make really meaningful cultural connections for their students, and why even. So what I want to do is just start off by just asking what you all know about, or how have you used Bishop's model in your thinking about teaching and learning? That seems to be something that's come on in math ed more recently. It's a model that was published in, or a metaphor in the 80s and 90s, but I have heard about it recently at conferences and things like that. So tell me about your experience with the original Bishop model, or what you see it. How is it?
Well,
Yes,
I'll share.
we all have to be speakers now. This is one of
I,
those times where we can't
I,
let someone else speak. Yeah.
yeah, it was fairly recent in my life as a math educator when somebody said windows and mirrors, just those two constructs, and what that means for math teaching. And it just was like having a metaphor just helps big ideas like come into focus. So this idea of mirror seeing yourself and window seeing others, just that beginning point is so important for thinking about how you're planning a math lesson, how you're thinking about engaging students in that math lesson, windows and mirrors. That was the beginning for me.
Hmm. Hmm. That's great.
I I would also agree. Using the terminology windows and mirrors is probably new to me within the last 5 years. And I came across it from reading Rochelle Gutierrez's work, as she
Hmm.
talks about equity. And so when I think about windows and mirrors and how I've used it as an educator, I really think about the equity pedagogies and some of our culturally based pedagogies where we focus on creating these inclusive mathematics learning environments where we're looking at our students' sociocultural backgrounds, we're recognizing, we're respecting them, and we view them as being assets to our mathematics instruction.
Hmm.
So the sliding doors and more of Bishop's definition was very new to me.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the doors was always something that I spent a lot of time trying to get my head around. What is that? How does that move Windows a little bit forward? And then, you guys can see where I thought about. Arthur, I want to ask you specifically because, what I hear from Brea and Jenny both are really sort of ethnomathematics, but maybe not. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly the sliding doors, well, the windows and the sliding doors certainly get us to think about ethnomathematics from the perspective of, looking at other cultures
Hmm.
and looking at other cultures, trying to understand the mathematics that they've developed as ways of resolving um, problems within the culture that needed to be resolved. And then the sliding door as a way of, okay, let us now understand from the point of view of actually practicing, stepping into the cultural practice and seeing how we might use some of those mathematical ideas and tools that were developed ourselves in order to think about mathematics within that cultural setting. Certainly, the idea of mirror gets us to think about the ethnomathematics of the students that we're working with, getting them to think about their funds of knowledge that are resonant within their families and communities.
Hmm.
So I think that we can think of windows and mirrors, windows, and sliding doors as um, being a way of approaching ideas of ethnomathematics.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
And
I
just
think what,
go ahead,
yeah.
Arthur.
No, I was going to sort of shift a little bit to talk about pedagogy,
Hmm.
because I think that these metaphors help us to understand ways of looking at mathematics, but they haven't approached yet how we teach the mathematics or how we engage the individuals in producing mathematics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's something else to be worked on and
Yes,
to be
yes.
thought about within each of these categories.
Nice. Okay, there. That's a good set. Let me hear from Sue if you're up to it, Sue, or if you're able. And also, just my understanding, just because people who are listening to this who hear the word ethnomathematics, that could be. I mean, like you try throwing that out there the next time you're at a store. People look like you're crazy. And so, really, the way I have learned in Arthur's book, what ethnomathematics is the easiest way to think about it. It's like the way people do math at home, in the workplace, and in their culture. And here's the thing: mathematics professors have a culture themselves. So ethnomathematics is really doing math in your space, in your place, and in other places. And I think that's a real tie between these two. Is is there something you could add to that, Arthur? Or?
No, in fact, I'm very happy that you brought up the idea that, even among mathematicians, that they have a culture, a way of thinking, a way of doing things, which constitutes an ethnomathematics. So that ethnomathematics isn't just something exotic, but rather can be professionalized as professional mathematicians have done.
Yes, it's more than just I count by 20s. That I use 20 or base 27 or whatever you. Sue, yes, I'm sorry you were coming off mute right before I interrupted you.
That's okay. No, that's okay. Like Brea and Jenny mentioned early on, I also had only been familiar with the windows and the mirrors. And this idea of sliding doors is so beautiful. I think all of it is very beautiful and very inviting and has the potential, when we apply it to teaching, to make more people feel welcome in the space. Each of those analogies. But to Arthur's sort of point and transition to pedagogy, one place that we can look as teachers with these analogies is, to think about storytelling. So if we think about any culture, any period in time, any period in history, any way of living our lives, we're rich with stories that are innately mathematical. And so I think there's a real opportunity to look around your immediate surroundings, look around those that are in front of you as students, and to look within yourself to find those stories that are innately mathematical, to invite more people into the conversation, and to use those stories within our teaching, within our classrooms. So that's kind of where I was thinking.
Yeah, story as a context, and now we have a metaphor to place that context. What is each one of these things? And I know Steve is off camera, so he's not on my screen. But welcome, Steve. I appreciate you joining us. We're just getting started with this. So before we talk about the pedagogy, because there were a couple of things that I wanted to point or ask and hear. The original metaphor, sort of me, feels unidirectional. You start with mirrors, you go to windows, and then do sliding glass doors. And I guess you're done. I'm not sure. I mean, it's a literature metaphor, right? And so we're sort of pushing it for math ed. But how do you all see that? Was that something you picked up as well?
I had an aha as I read, because, pairing with this idea of the flashlight, that it's whether you're indoors or outdoors. And so the mirrors are typically indoors. And if you're looking out a window, you're also still indoors. And so the sliding door allows you to go out into the world of mathematics, into the world of, whatever the country is, whatever the, experiences. And so that is such a beautiful, to me, connection to, like, are you inside, whether you're looking at yourself or looking out, or are you actually going out and, like, being a part of this other world. So this was like a big, exciting thing for me about pushing us harder, further in opening up the world to our students and having them out in that world, not just like viewing it from the window.
Hmm. Yeah, I think in this article I wrote, the window is for looking, doorways are for walking through. That's sort of what you're articulating because that feels much more immersive. Um, but then when I teach a lesson, it's hard to stop at a window anyway. I would want the kids to be involved. What were you going to say, Jenny, more?
Yeah, so just building off of that, I read a book a long time ago and it was about risk taking.
Mm.
And it's about standing at your circle of comfort. And if you're at the rim of that circle and something is uncomfortable, if you step back, your circle of comfort becomes smaller. And if you step out over that circle, then your circle of comfort becomes bigger. So I made a connection to this doorway thing. So you're standing at the doorway and you're deciding whether you're ready to like step out into that world, which is so important in math. Like oh, I don't know, I'm not good at math. I don't want to do that. I don't feel comfortable being out there doing this thing. And so thinking about this sliding glass door is standing at this sill or whatever it's called in a doorway and deciding, am I going to step out into this world and experience it, or am I going to step back away into my own comfort zone? So for math, that's about the risk taking that's so important and figuring stuff out. Like, I'm going to try a different way. I'm going to be open to this new thing. I'm going to try this new challenge. So the sliding glass door to me is really powerful in thinking about empowering students to get out there, to put themselves out there.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Anyone else have something you want to add to that idea? Yeah, Brea.
I do, and I want to build on what Jenny was just mentioning about empowerment. And when I read your the article, and you talked about the teacher holding the flashlight and mathematics being in the dark, and I thought about how what we're really doing is we're empowering students to do all of these great things. Should we not also empower them to hold the flashlight?
Yes.
And I don't know, because we talk about that agency, right? And so they have the agency through the construct of the mirrors and the windows and the sliding doors and even the pillars. But who is the person who has the mathematical authority? Because if we just keep it at the teacher having the flashlight, then it still comes back to me, right? So that was something I thought about as I read.
Okay. At the risk of over participating, Brea, I was thinking the same thing. And by the time they go through the glass doorway, they're outside and there's natural lighting. There's the, world of the natural light. Nobody's holding the flashlight because the whole world is there, lit by the sun. And then we can see all that is there to offer in, metaphorically, but realistically in the world of mathematics. Like, you've joined out there to this risk-taking, multicultural, who knows what you're going to discover world.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so that's one thing I love about these kinds of things. When you're able to listen to people, you think, oh, I've come so far and I've progressed this thing by giving students agency. They decide when to look out the window. They decide when to look at the door. And Bree's going, how about we give them the flashlight? That's good, Brea. I love it. Just like, let's push it a little further. And I think I want to play off of that because then this comes back to the pedagogy to me, Arthur. What's the role of the teacher then? When I got my PhD, the first classes I taught, I was like, here's an activity. This is student-centered. You're the students. Let me know when you get the idea. That's not what we're talking about. So what is the pedagogy in this space? And we can look at each of these and then we'll talk about pillars later.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is the question of pedagogy sort of really does loom when you think about, okay, do you give the students the flashlight? Do they take the flashlight? What happens when they walk out through the sliding door and world is lit by the sun. And so where they can draw their attention is different because they can make that decision because there isn't a light that is drawing their attention and saying, this is what you need to attend to. And so it does raise lots of interesting questions around who has the power, who has the agency, what kinds of mathematical ideas are students wanting to explore, what kinds of mathematical objects and relationships are they finding, how do they talk about these objects and relationships with each other, are they constrained by sort of external forces that say, okay, well, here is the curriculum and here is what's going to be expected of you to be able to perform for some national or statewide tests? What role does a teacher play in helping students to understand the brilliance that they have and how they can use that brilliance to approach the mathematics? There are lots of these kinds of questions, I think, that are looming in this in our discussion of the metaphor. And one has to make certain kinds of decisions. They're not just instructional decisions, they're also political decisions, right? Does the teacher act in a creative, insubordinate
mine was really
way
long, but then it took
in order to
20
provide
minutes for
to
them to
students?
put this together.
I think we hear
Yeah, right. No,
Steve's voice. In order to provide to students access to mathematics, which may not be the mathematics which has been determined that they should have access to at that particular moment in their grade and school year.
So, Arthur, you've just introduced a lot of really interesting questions there that we want to touch on. And I mean, one of the things I thought of initially, just in that line is, isn't the metaphor in some ways giving some students the agencies because, or letting them define the math? I mean, on the one hand, they're saying, I'm the mathematician. Now, how am I a mathematician interacting in a bigger world? Oh, let me go explore that. Oh, I learned something. Let me take it back and see what that looks like in my space. But then and this is especially the case for the teachers that'll be listening to this. They have objectives that they have to hit. And honestly, if they don't hit those objectives, bad things can happen for them. They have to, so they're in a world where others define what they need to know. How do we, and Brea, this is the thing you pointed, how do we provide agency in that space where someone else is saying, here's the math? That's a question that I wonder.
You know, one word that I keep hearing used a lot is the word decision, that there are decisions to be made. So, by the person that might be on the doorway into this beautiful lit world outside, but also a teacher who needs to make decisions. I think to start answering that question, the role of choice is really critical. So if you're an educator and you've got a particular set of objectives and particular parts of mathematics that you need to make sure you teach to your students, are there opportunities for choice in there in some way, in the way that it's explored, in the way that a child would express what they know, in a way that they're going to engage with the mathematics? I think a key move that aligns with this framework in the service of agency and empowerment is certainly the role of choice, and a teacher understanding how to offer up those choices in alignment with the objectives that they're being asked to teach.
Okay, that's good. So what do we do then when the teachers themselves don't maybe know exactly what they're supposed to be teaching? They know the objectives, but maybe the math itself, they don't have a really fluid, dynamic knowledge of that and understanding of it. And I mean, this happens, we see it in our country a lot too. Teachers lecture because that's what they were told. That is their worldview. When we say teach differently, we're literally breaking apart their worldview and saying, try something new. And I know that's the case I mean, I've seen it in the jungle of Ecuador and in the mountains of Guatemala, and we all saw it in remote Nepal. Um, so how do we help the teachers get to that point while letting the students progress?
Well, using the trip to Guatemala this summer, I think, as an example of that, this takes the framework and shifts it to, I think, teacher education.
Mhm.
So, what we experienced through our professional learning was that teachers who were, we'll say, concerned about using more conceptual materials and tools in their mathematics instruction through the professional learning had at first a window just to see what does this really look like? Why could this be a better option than my just teaching all the formulas and having students to memorize these ideas? And I think because of the environment that we created as educators, it created a sliding door. So it didn't take, I think it was, who was it? I think it was Saul, who was leading our professional development. It didn't take him saying, you must do this in your classroom. But the example, the trust that had been established amongst educators, it led to people just saying, I'm going to try this in multiple classrooms. And they're trying it, then led them to say, oh, let me just continue to do this new thing.
Mhm.
Right. So I think what you're really talking about are professional learning experiences that allow us as mathematics teachers to have that vulnerability, to be willing to learn and to explore mathematics teaching in ways that maybe we're not as familiar with, or be able to share with others some things that we are, so that it broadens our perspectives and our worldview.
So that's almost taking the metaphor to the professional development area. And I appreciate you saying that. Abby, who was on the trip with you too, has thought about that. How can we write about this model in the professional development world? Um, yeah. For students, so the one reason I wrote this article was because I felt like, I mean, I've heard the criticism, especially coming from a statistics program, well, that's all wonderful that kids see themselves as in the mathematics and they experience real world mathematics, but sometimes you just have to do the basic structures of math, and I might not understand the connection right now, but I have to know defined the patterns of perfect squares because there's some beauty in that, and I'll learn some sort of mathematical number sense. And honestly, in this mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors, I don't even see space for number talks. That's not one of those things. And that's sort of what I'm thinking. So what do you think about that idea? Where does that fit? Or does the pillar add to that? Yes, Arthur, go ahead.
Well, I was actually going to request that you sort of talk a little bit more about the pillar, because I
Mhm.
find that could use a little more elaboration.
Yeah, so in the article I was writing about, and as I think about this, I feel like we talk a lot about making the real world connections. We want students to experience the math themselves. There are times maybe that we have to have someone who can build the fundamental structures on which we do these real world connections. And sometimes we have to learn those structures even before we see the real world connection. Um, Hopefully it's rare. Or sometimes just meaning to go, let's take this idea and see if I could find the numbers and the math and the function that happens in it, so that I can apply it. I think in a lot of ways, people discovered mathematics in the real world, and then they wanted to articulate what they were doing, and they thought, hey, if I can articulate what I did, you can apply it to whatever thing. And we've taken that as the thing we do to teach. We go, hey, here's the general rule. Now you figure out how to apply it. And that's a little overwhelming. We almost start with the pillar in a classroom. And so for
Yeah,
me, the pillar is pushing this to the just pure doing math step,
yeah.
because sometimes we may have to just do math, but that doesn't happen unless one, the teachers, the students trust that there's a reason they're doing this, and that
Hmm.
that will
Hmm.
happen if they've been doing real world situations. And then
Hmm.
secondly, the students have to believe that they have a voice, that they
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
agency, that nothing will be learned unless they actually do the thinking
Mhm.
themselves.
Mhm.
And if that happens, then I think students are willing to engage
Mhm.
enthusiastically. You see them,
Mhm.
right? How many times do kids love doing math puzzles that has
Mhm.
no window, sliding glass door, or mirror, but it's an
Mhm.
engaging puzzle.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. I I mean, I think doing puzzles can be either mirror or window, but
Oh, okay.
um, getting back to the pillars metaphor, I'm reminded of the work of Dave Hewitt, an English mathematics educator, who wrote very powerfully, I think, about what he considers to be ways, two categories of mathematics curriculum. And
Mm,
that is one which is what he calls arbitrary. That is, there are those things in the mathematics curriculum which aren't inventable. That is, they're handed down historically.
mm,
So in English, the way we name numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, the students aren't going to invent that. That those labels come to us historically. Or the Cartesian plane, the fact that we have an XY axis. That's a kind of arbitrary tool that was invented, and it's unlikely that students are going to come up with that particular tool themselves. So um, for Hewitt, things that are arbitrary are things that are the pillars that need to be told
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
because, as I say, they're historical. They're heritage. They're things that are handed down. However, there's aspects of the curriculum which are what he calls necessary. They're kind of logically necessary. They're things that are discoverable. There are ways of crafting tasks or activities so that students engaging in those tasks will come to discover um, the commutative law, for example, of addition, or will come to discover different principles of combinatorics because of the way in which they're engaging with those tasks. And so for Hewitt, what's arbitrary needs to be given. What's necessary, we need to find ways of designing tasks that engages students so that they can come up with and discover those ideas on their own or through dialogue, collaboration with other students.
mm-hmm. So that's a pedagogical strategy. What are your thoughts about that? Anyone have ideas or have some things that I'm thinking about? Steve, you're on
I'm
mute.
making,
Yeah, go ahead, Jenny. Jenny, you start, and then Steve. Go ahead.
I'm thinking about properties
Hmm.
and place value. So if we think about computation and we think about this whole construct, windows, mirrors, sliding doors, and pillars, it also applies if you're just adding. It isn't just about like it it is important to have the cultural storytelling and all that sort of thing, but it's also true if you're just adding. So I think about like 48 plus 49.
Hmm.
And so you're thinking, instead of saying, here's how we're going to solve that and telling students how to do it, then you're saying, how might you add these numbers? What are your options? What do you like? Well, that's the sort of the me in it, right? The mirror. Like, I think I would like to add the tens and add the ones. Ooh, I think I would like to change those numbers up and then fix them later. So there's different ways they might think about that. And then as different students are sharing their ideas, that's the window. Another student's listening to a student and they're like, oh, I kind of like their way of thinking. And then eventually they're understanding these pillars of place value, that you have these places and what that means, and these properties that you can like move numbers around and, add them in different ways and all these sort of things. And now they're empowered so they can walk through the sliding glass door and just join the world of, fluent math doers that see a problem like 48 plus 49 and don't feel constrained that there's one way to do it, but they can do it in a way that, fits them as a person, because they've learned about it in community. So I'm thinking about, I just thought of a very basic example as I was listening to Arthur about these properties or something that can be discovered and explored and understood. And that gives that agency that like Brea was talking about to like be in the, to be outdoors doing the math with, in a way that is meaningful.
I
Yeah,
want to follow up on that if I could.
please do.
I'm sorry that I'm late. That's not worth explaining why. But I think that the word that Arthur used, and I suspect others have, is engage. I think we talk a lot about to engage, to grab, to give kids a reason to care, to have kids feel like they belong. All of that are aspects of engaging, but it's easy to talk about. We see a whole lot of kids that are not engaged. And where I find this metaphor to be really valuable is the first place you engage is when you see yourself. And so I start with a context. Yes, Jenny, you're absolutely right. We can do it with 45 plus 35 and all that stuff. But I prefer to show them a can where the price is 35 cents and 45 cents as the lead in so that, oh, I know what's going on here. The whole notion of what do you notice is embedded in this idea of reflecting what you see, and then what do you notice when it's a window and you're sort of seeing outside of yourself. Those are incredibly powerful ways to have kids to care. Once they care, once they're engaged, it's amazing what they will tolerate us doing with them, to them, for them. And that's where the idea of the door, okay, fine. So that's cool. And you see yourself and you see this, and this context makes sense to you and you can relate to it. Now, let's sort of surface on some mathematics. Let's sort of see about what you might do with that. I think we spend far too much time telling kids, asking kids the question, as opposed to asking the kids, so what's the question? What might you want to know? What do you wonder about? And then that transition from that engagement around the question and the mathematics, I think, leads directly to pillars. And, I wrote at one point in all of this stuff that it strikes me that pillars is where we get at the structure of math. You don't ever start with that, although we try and do that in our textbooks and in our instruction. But the pillars are when you put pieces together, when you make connections, when you try and generalize. And that's why I've been so captivated by this four-stage metaphor. I also think that it's so perfect for reading because we forget that there's reading and then there's literature. This was designed for reading and reading and giving kids a reason to care about reading. We know that reading as a skill, literature as a use of that skill or an application is all mushed together in mathematics. And so that's one of the reason why I really like extending this beyond just the door into the idea of pillars, because it says to teachers, there's something important at each of those stages, and they build on one another. And the first two really are the grab in order to have kids care, at which point they might be interested in doing some math, at which point we can step back and say, so what happened here? How are they the same? How are they different? And that's the way in which I've been drawn into the power of this.